What are the essentials of an effective arm care routine? That's what we're gonna be breaking down today. We're gonna be going over my favorite exercises to target each part of the throwing arm and giving you guys a little bit of information as far as the biomechanics of what is happening in the throw so that you have a better understanding of why we need to strengthen and target each area that we're gonna be covering in this video. Stick around to the end. I'm also gonna be giving you guys a couple sample routines to inform your own training decisions. Let's dive in. But first, who am I and what is tread? I was the guy who couldn't quite put it together in time. Right? I had some talent. I went from 73 to 98 miles an hour, but I had a ton of injuries and ultimately wasn't able to put together the puzzle pieces quick enough in my own career. And so I've spent the past decade trying to figure this out to help other players avoid making a lot of the same mistakes. Tread's goal, Tread's whole mission is to provide the information and resources to help pitchers reach their athletic potential. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, you're not already subscribed to this channel, go ahead, hit the subscribe button. Let's dive in. I want to real quick recap what exactly is arm care, because I think that's where the definition gets a little bit muddied in terms of what people traditionally think of when they think of arm care. A lot of people, when you think of it, what comes to mind? You're probably thinking of light shoulder tubing, you're thinking of bands, you're thinking of 3 to 5 pound dumbbells, and a lot of this is coming from the rehabilitation world. But I would argue that while it can include these things in the right context, it's actually a much broader topic than just this. So really, when you think of it, arm care comes down to all the different protocols and habits that a pitcher will incorporate into his routine for the goal of maintaining arm health. And so when we look at it from this lens, really we're talking about lifting. Your warm-up itself is arm care, so all the band work, the shoulder tubes, the arm circles, everything you're doing to warm up your arm pre-throwing, right? That falls under the category of arm care. Soft tissue work also falling under that category. Any manual therapy that you're getting, recovery modalities, right? Stim, heat, voodoo floss bands, any sort of these modalities for the intent of recovering your arm also fall under arm care. Mobility work falls under arm care. Proper nutrition and sleep as it relates to your recovery, also arm care. Workload management is arm care. Arm-specific strengthening, which is what this video is focusing on, yes, it's arm care. My point here is that it's a global phenomenon. Your arm care is far more than just looking at these isolated stabilization exercises and understanding that really much more goes into that equation and making sure that the entire program that you're following, from what you're doing in the weight room, pre-throwing, during your throwing, workload management, it all factors in. And so injuries cannot be truly minimized if we just look at arm care through this isolationist lens. Like, give me a 5-minute routine that I can do, give me a 10-minute routine that I can do, and I'll minimize injuries. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. And so it factors in having to understand how all the pieces fit together to truly minimize injury risk. So here is the problem that we're up against when we're trying to figure out how to stay healthy and stabilize our arm, because the forces of pitching are numerous. Trying to generate an incredible amount of energy and momentum to send up the chain from the lower half into the trunk, out and around into the arm. And we're trying to be able to responsibly stabilize and dissipate that energy and momentum out and around through these very small muscles through the arm. So we're using our arm as a whip, and it's moving extremely fast and subject to extremely high torques and rotational velocities. We look at what's happening in leg cocking and acceleration phase. There's an elbow varus torque happening, and this can be upwards of 100 Newton meters, which for context, that's the equivalent as the arm gets to peak layback of holding a 60 to 80 pound dumbbell from your arm at peak layback. Horizontal adduction torque as the torso rotates away from the arm at upwards of 1,000 degrees per second. As the arm gets left behind, there's a torque being placed on the front of the shoulder as well. Shoulder internal rotation. So as our arm actually begins to slingshot forward, that's happening at upwards of 4,000 to 5,000 plus degrees per second. This is often cited as the fastest recorded motion in sports. And so we have to be able to stabilize not only against that torque, but also as that arm accelerates and slingshots forward, how do we stabilize that joint, make sure the shoulder stays centered in the joint, and make sure that elbow also stays stable as well. During the deceleration phase, right, there's an elbow extension torque as well. So as our torso rotates, the arm spirals out, that elbow is extending at upwards of 2,000 degrees per second as we rotate away from the arm. So we need something to be able to decelerate that extension of the elbow. There's a shoulder external rotation torque. So as that arm slingshots forward, from external rotation to internal rotation, now the backside of the shoulder needs to decelerate into internal rotation. So at 4,000 to 5,000 degrees per second, it doesn't just stop at ball release. Now we need something to decelerate us out front. So the back of the shoulder becomes extremely important to slow down the arm at that point in time. As the arm also decelerates not just into internal, but also cross body, we need something to decelerate us cross body. And so that's where the back side of the joint comes into play, the scapular muscles that we traditionally think of. And then a less talked about force that we have to deal with is, I call it a shoulder distraction force. And distraction is really when you think about somebody yanking your arm away from your body, it's that long axis distraction where it's essentially we're throwing our arm off our body and we need something to decelerate and make sure that that arm gets suctioned back into the joint and doesn't just rip off our body. And this is a surprising number, 1 to 1.5 times body weight or higher. So for a 200-pound person, this is a 300-pound distraction force yanking your arm out of the socket. That's like hanging from a bar from one hand, holding a 100-pound dumbbell. That's how much load is being put through your arm in terms of the distraction force at bar release. So these are the forces that we're having to deal with, and we can't ignore the role of mobility, of biomechanics, in being able to dissipate these forces as well, but recognizing just what problem we're up against from more of a stabilization standpoint. Proper sequencing, proper scapular thoracic mechanics, right? These help immensely, but recognizing there's a lot that we need to take into account from a strengthening standpoint. Let's get into the essentials of an effective arm care routine. The first non-negotiable is the Flexor Pronator. And everyone's talking about UCL injuries, how to prevent Tommy John. This, in my opinion, is where it starts. It starts from having a strong Flexor Pronator muscle. Again, there's an extreme amount of torque as the arm transitions into layback and into bar release. And so the Flexor Pronator muscle, the Flexor Pronator mass, these three key muscles are really what are stabilizing that inner elbow and making sure that that torque isn't going as much to the UCL and it's being more offloaded by these muscles. So these are extremely responsible for making sure that torque isn't being taken up by the UCL and it's being effectively offloaded by these muscles. Now, when these muscles fatigue or they're weak, that risk increases exponentially of a potential UCL injury. The reason is that a UCL failure rate is around 35 Newton meters. Again, we know that that 100 Newton meter plus measurement is what we commonly see in high level throwers. And so that UCL would tear on any given pitch if the Flexor Pronator muscles weren't there. And so just highlighting how important these are. The goal is to build strength and endurance in these three key muscles. And so the first exercise that I want you to look at, any sort of fingertip type hold. And the idea is to put load in that second knuckle. It's really taking the thumb out of it, taking the furthest knuckle out of it. And we're just gonna be holding a dumbbell at our side. And so this would be a thumbless farmer's walk. The idea is to really strengthen those finger flexors and make sure that we're able to properly stabilize that inner elbow as we go into layback. Another progression here would be fingertip bar hangs, but anything where you're gripping heavy load is going to be activating the flexors. So I don't want you to think that lifting isn't also adding to the equation, but fingertip holds in particular are going to really isolate and target this muscle more than most anything else you'd be doing. A benchmark here for the farmer's walks would be 60 seconds with 90 pounds. Another key muscle would be the pronator muscle. And this is especially active on any sort of breaking pitch, any sort of pitch where we're in supination and transitioning into pronation through ball release. Any pitch that we throw, even fastballs, is gonna have some pronation, but anything where we're in peak supination, it's gonna be especially active. And so making sure that we're training this. A couple that I really do like are band cable pronation, so making sure that we're able to control into full supination and then really feel that contraction into peak pronation. And so we're controlling the entire range of motion here. And then another key exercise that I like is a band deviation exercise. So we can wrap the band around our body and we're just controlling thumb up to thumb down from this position. Another option for the pronator would be isometric holds. So you can take a baseball bat, you can take a dowel, whatever you have, and we're now taking ourselves into peak supination and contracting out of that end range position. So making sure that we're strong and stable in that end range position that we're gonna be in, especially on breaking balls. And again, this one's a little bit less important for the UCL, more important for preventing flexor strains. FCU, this would be the muscle on the inside of the elbow, the inside of the forearm, that would be contracting when you deviate this way, when you move the hand this way. A good one here would be offset barbell hold. So take a barbell, hold it in the center, put a 2.5 pound plate on the end, and we're just holding it at our side, preventing that barbell from winning, preventing it from taking us into deviation. So training isometrically right at our side to be able to strengthen this muscle. This is one of the key muscles that stabilizes the inner elbow based on where it attaches and how it lays over top of the UCL. A benchmark for the barbell holds would be 60 seconds with 2.5 pounds on one side of the bar. The second essential would be the subscap, and this isn't often talked about when it comes to arm care routines. Really, this is important for controlling the joint in that leg cocking and acceleration phase. As that arm transitions into layback, there's a force trying to shoot the front of the shoulder forward in the socket as the arm moves back. The subscap you can think of as almost a seatbelt for the joint. The subscap is what prevents the front of the shoulder from shooting forward and keeps it centered in the socket along with the rotator cuff on the back side. So this is often not talked about when it comes to arm care routines. The other piece that the subscap is responsible for is as that arm transitions into external rotation, right? We don't just want the arm to like flop back, right? We want to be able to get in and out of that position with control and make sure that we can fire out of that end range position. And so that subscap is actually controlling and lengthening as we go into external rotation so that when we get to that peak position, we're still in that strong, stable position to then allow for that aggressive acceleration out of that position. So it's really about controlling as we go into layback and making sure the shoulder stays in a center position. This is extremely important for minimizing any sort of rotator cuff impingement, any sort of superior labrum issues, bicep tendonitis, where that shoulder starts to shoot forward. You start to irritate the bicep tendon at the front of the shoulder, anterior capsule issues. And so credit to one of my buddies, Ryan Yoshida with Armored Heat, for that that first time I've heard that analogy of the seatbelt, but it's a really good descriptor of what the Subscap actually does in the throw. We're trying to create a stable base in this position. We're trying to build eccentric strength endurance in the Subscap, and one good option here would be a three-way shoulder internal rotation. I like using bands. There's different ways to target this using dumbbells and other types of manual exercises. This is a good one because in one kind of series, we can train that muscle in all parts of the range of motion. So you're gonna start initially at that 90-90 position, controlling into external rotation. You can start a little bit more conservatively. You don't have to allow yourself to go into crazy amounts of external. You can start relatively conservatively. You wanna feel that contraction happening deep in the armpit. And so we're just controlling that range of motion from deep in the armpit and feeling like we're controlling it in a slow eccentric way. Again, going through the 3 different positions here and trying to feel that ball and stagger rotation. We're not just trying to move the weight. We're trying to really control it and tune it and make sure that shoulder stays centered as we move through these positions. The next essential would be scapular stabilizers. The first one here we're going to talk about would be a muscle called the serratus anterior, which essentially it's those kind of finger-like muscles on your side of your rib cage here. The point here is that as we're transitioning into layback and acceleration, our scapula, you can think of it as it needs to have a stable base from this position. So you've heard the term, you can't shoot a cannon out of a canoe. It's this idea that if we're gonna be able to accelerate and truly take our arm out and around to bar release and produce the amount of velocity we possibly can, we need that scapula to be flush against the ribcage in a very stable position as we go into that aggressive external rotation position. So this is a key muscle that keeps the scapula in a stable position, flush against the ribcage, and not kind of wobbling all over the place. It really suctions it to the ribcage. Our goal is to build strength endurance in the serratus anterior as well. You've probably done kettlebell wader walks. Here's a version with a band that I think is a little bit better. It adds a little bit more of a stability to man to the exercise. And then also recognizing the serratus is also responsible for stabilizing your scapula in deceleration, out front, in protraction, when that arm is reaching through ball release. So anything where we're getting out front and loading up that muscle. Push-up iso holds are a great intro one, and then anything where we're loading up the upper half here. So a bear crawl exploration, again, one of my favorites, making sure we're driving the rib cage away from the ground and really loading up the scapula from this position. You should feel a contraction in that kind of lateral rib cage area as you're going through these movements. Going hand in hand with the serratus when it comes to stabilizing the scapula in that end range position would be the lower and middle trapezius. And these are the muscles most people think of when they think of scapular strengthening, scapular training. They're thinking of band reverse flies, they're thinking of different sorts of exercises for the back side of the shoulder. And again, these are all great, but the point is cross-body deceleration. As we're getting out in front of our body, these muscles are having to lengthen, what's called eccentrically. They're having to lengthen to decelerate the arm moving out in front of our body. Also recognizing these muscles are responsible in this position here. They're contracting in a shortened state to stabilize us here, and then they're lengthening out front to slow the arm down. So it's important to train it in both respects. 2 good exercises. One would be the power raise. So you're gonna lay on your side on a bench and we're gonna control the weight all the way down. I would encourage you to start off with this exercise being a little bit more conservative, stopping right around parallel with the ground. As you get more comfortable, you can really control it all the way down to the ground and get that big reach cross body. You should feel a stretch in the back side of the scap. Again, you can start a little bit lighter and be a little bit more conservative before you just go and start trying to throw weight around. It's about doing it right. Landmine barbell rotations or barbell decelerations are another great option here, which seem to match the curve and match the feeling of that cross body deceleration very well. A benchmark here with the power raise would be doing 10+ reps with 15 to 20 pounds. And for end range control, stabilization in that position at max external, Blackburns are a great option, teaching those muscles to contract and fire in that shortened state. And then TRX alternating angels are a good one you can check out here as well. My essential number 4 would be posterior cuff. And we've already touched a little bit on why it's important, but recognizing that it's not just responsible for decelerating you out front, it's also responsible for suctioning the shoulder back in the joint and keeping it centered as the arm rotates. So this is important for minimizing shoulder impingement, labral tears, keeping it strong just to minimize any sort of like posterior cuff issues into deceleration as well. And so recognizing we need to train it in both aspects. We need to train it out here, and then we also need to train it back here. So we want full control, shortened, and then also in that eccentric lengthened position. Seated dumbbell external rotations are one of my favorites to be able to train that full range external rotation. This is one you want to be careful on initially, going past parallel with the ground, but as you get more comfortable, as you slowly build up loads, you slowly build up volume, that's one that, depending on how much mobility you have, you might be able to comfortably take it a little bit past parallel with the ground. And so I would encourage you to try to build up to 10% of your body weight for 10 reps that's a benchmark we'll shoot for with a lot of guys. As far as training the short position, end range liftoffs are a good option, although there's a lot of other options that you can incorporate besides just this one. Essential number 5 is coordination. So now we're trying to tie all the different pieces together. This is general stabilization type training, and it's not necessarily gonna overly fatigue any one specific muscle. It's not about an isolation, it's about integration. And so you've heard the term co-contraction. It's really just general stability work. It's about getting everything to fire together. And so some different examples: shoulder tube, shoulder sphere, there's the mini water balls. These all have a general stability training effect where we're trying to focus on kind of that three-dimensional training stimulus. You're gonna be training it in different ranges of motion. So that first part would be anything where we're in a little bit of external rotation, full retraction. And so you're getting close to your landing position, stabilizing in that position. The second would be right around ball release in line with the trunk. And the third would be getting a reach out in front where that scapula is really reaching and you're a little bit cross body and stabilizing in that position. You can do this with a partner. Partner rhythmic stabilizations are a great option as well, but something where we're trying to get everything to fire and coordinate together against a kind of unpredictable stimulus. So those are the 5 essentials. Now we're gonna get into some of the nitty-gritty of how to exactly apply this. So when to do arm care, this is kind of a hotly debated topic. There's a few options here. Some people will say do arm care post-throwing, makes the most sense. I think there's some pros and cons to this. I always prefer this myself just because you typically see higher compliance with guys. They're already warmed up, they just threw. It's something they can just tack on to the end of any bullpen or tack on to the end of any inner squat or any outing because they're already warmed up. They just go do their specific routine and move on. Now, this can kind of backfire if a guy just threw 100 pitches, 110 pitches, they're extremely fatigued, and they might actually need a little bit of recovery. And so you're actually doing a little bit more tissue damage at this point, which might delay the recovery process. So that would be one consideration. If you just threw a ton of pitches, your arm is totally gassed, maybe push that arm care routine back to the next day and do it on day 2. Some guys prefer to do it the next day anyway, just because they feel like they have a better gauge on how sore they are, what type of recovery they need, how much to dose that arm care routine, so they can kind of regulate how much they do based on that next day soreness. Option number 3 would be pre-throwing. I don't love this option as much because it's going to limit how much load you can use. So you can go through some of these exercises very, very light, but if you go through too aggressively, now you're fatigued for your actual throwing. And so just doing it pre-throwing, right, you can kind of stimulate those areas a little bit as a from a pre-throwing standpoint, but you can't really get after it. If your goal is to really strengthen these areas, especially in the off season, you're not going to be able to get after it if you try to put it in the pre-throwing phase entirely. Option number 4 would be a pre and post-throwing combo. So this would be, you might do something in the warm-up to kind of stimulate these areas, but then post-throwing, you're doing a little bit more. And so you can kind of split up the volume, maybe a set super light pre-throwing, and then one set through these different exercises a little bit more aggressively in that post-throwing phase. I do like this one a little bit better with guys that prefer to do it this way. And then option number 5 is just you don't have a specific arm care routine. These different stabilization exercises and isolation exercises get mixed into your lifting for the week. So a good lifting routine could theoretically have a lot of these things already checked off within the lifting for the week, and there isn't any need to add any additional quote-unquote arm care or stabilization exercises beyond what you're already doing in the weight room. Set of squats, set of dumbbell bench press, superset with a seated dumbbell external rotation, superset with a TRX, IYT raise, or some sort of Flexor Pronator work. Right? This can definitely work as well. The idea here is there isn't one right answer. It's really about putting it where the player will actually follow it and making sure over the course of the entire week that these different areas are being hit and being strengthened and maintained over time. A few final considerations. You'll see this theme, 3 to 5 pound dumbbells, light shoulder tubing. It's really not going to cut it for a lot of these areas if you're trying to not just get healthy out of a post-surgical or a rehab phase, but actually get stronger and bulletproof that area from there. We need to be able to pick exercises that we can progress the same way that we would any sort of weight room exercise. Proper lifting isn't just for velocity. Proper lifting is also arm care. So recognizing that everything we're doing in the weight room is reinforcing good movement, or it's actually reinforcing negative movement patterns. There's a ton of good stuff happening in the weight room. We talk about the muscles responsible for stabilizing and decelerating, and the pec is super involved, and the posterior delt and the bicep and the grip, and all these things are still being stimulated in the weight room. And so recognizing that it's not just about performance enhancement in the weight room, it's also about injury mitigation if you're doing it right in the weight room. And so that's a whole separate topic for a different video. As far as how much to do, in season, recognize the goal is really maintenance. You really should have done your work in the off season to build strength in these stabilization muscles. And in season, it's really just about constant stimulation, just enough to maintain the strength and the endurance that you've built. So it's about minimum effective dose. You really shouldn't be getting sore from the arm care work that you're doing in season. It should be just enough, just how you approach your lifting in season, just enough to maintain the work that you put in the off season. Now in the off season, it is about strengthening, and some soreness is okay. Just make sure as you're timing up when to really push it on some of these movements. You're fresh for those 1 or 2 high output days or bullpen days in the off season, and you've just timed it accordingly throughout the week. As promised, here's a couple sample routines just to get an idea of how these things can look for a few different scenarios, a few different players in both the in-season and off-season phases. So again, this is not a one-size-fits-all. It's knowing there's a ton of different great solutions that check all the boxes we've talked about. To summarize everything we've talked about, we're looking for UCL protection. We're really talking about Flexor Pronator strength and endurance, taking care to strengthen the muscles in your elbow. We're talking about control during layback and acceleration. What are we talking about? We're talking about end range scapular control and stability, strengthening the low and mid trap, the serratus, everything that keeps you in a stable base as that shoulder is rotating extremely aggressively into ball release. And then for decel armor, it's that cross body strength, and not just the back of the shoulder, the posterior cuff, rotator cuff, but also in those scapular muscles. So training that posterior cross body position as well. The point I wanted to get across in this video is that everything is arm care, and there is no one right way to do things. There is no one perfect program. Strengthening your stabilizers isn't enough. At the end of the day, it's about getting assessed and understanding how all the different pieces fit together. So making sure that you have an understanding of what your biomechanical flaws might be, which might be stressing various points throughout your body a little bit differently depending on whatever flaws you might have. It's about workload management, and are you monitoring that? Do you have a program to follow? It's about the mobility side, the lifting form, the lifting programming, and much, much more that goes into it. So my biggest mistake in high school was at 15, 16, 17, thinking I could figure this all out myself. Really was in kind of way over my head, and didn't realize until later on in college that I'd wasted much of that time when I could have made 4 or 5 years of progress in 1 or 2 years if I could kind of go back knowing what I know now. So that was my biggest mistake. If you guys are looking for any sort of guidance, help, you're kind of struggling, you're working back from an injury, right? That's what we're here for. We're here to provide the information and the resources to help pitchers reach their athletic potential. This includes staying and getting healthy. If you have questions for us, reach out, drop a comment down below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.